It's the Redbird Reboot podcast. Are you ready to get rebooted, Cardinals fans? He settles down, at least in the zone, and does not stop running.
Blake Murphy.
This is the identity for the Arizona Cardinals.
The run defense is just horrendous, and it's been horrendous for the Cardinals for a long time.
And Marcos Labrada.
He's going to bring over his philosophy. It should make it better.
Present the hottest NFL podcast from the country's hottest state.
He should be turning around the logo.
Actually, some breaking news we can cover here. This popped up just about, 6 minutes ago.
It's Redbird Reboot.
Arizona Cardinals fans, welcome into the Redbird Reboot podcast. I'm Blake Murphy, and joining me as always is going to be the co-host Marcos Labrada at Pancake Soul. Marcos, Cardinals fans have had kind of a quiet week for the most part. It's not been a quiet week around the NFL, however. How are you doing amidst all of the crazy trade wins, midnight trades happening on the East Coast, and an upcoming 2025 NFL draft that is sure to really help out the Cardinals quite a bit when it comes to their talent?
Well, it's a lot of movement and a lot that's going on. It's actually kind of insane that like this type of movement's happening the way it is. And the rumors that are going around and all the everything, like especially with the quarterbacks, finding new homes, the ones that we thought like were like gonna be like pieces to like a franchise, and they end up going to other teams. I mean, obviously Justin Fields is the example, and Mac Jones. And I found an interesting stat ever since like I think it was like 2022, I believe. Ever since that class, there's 17 quarterbacks that were taken. Only two of them are starters. That's insane.
That is just, it's the NFL, meaning not for long, a lot of different times. Speaking of not for long, we do have to talk about, since we missed it last week, just going over with all of the Cards and free agency news. Aaron Donald, a longtime rival for the Arizona Cardinals, did indeed retire last week. Just one of those all-time great players. One of those players that the greatest compliment you can give is that you're happy that he's not going to be facing down Kyler Murray anymore. Kyler's one playoff game, of course, where they didn't have Rodney Hudson and didn't have DeAndre Hopkins. Aaron Donald was just a menace all over the place. I think that Kyler even said that he was happy that he retired for the most part. Do you think, Marcos, that this is one of the areas that we've seen for the NFL with how great is one of those greats? Like when you talk about the Mount Rushmore or the Hall of Fame type of players, you got guys like Tom Brady, Joe Montana is up there for the most part. You can probably say Jerry Rice would be there. For us Cardinals fans, it's our Larry Fitzgerald. Where do you think Aaron Donald would fit as far as his legacy for his time in the NFL, retiring maybe a bit earlier than some people may have expected? He's not even in his mid-30s yet.
He's much maligned in my book. I really, really don't like the guy. I mean, the guy personally, he's a good person. I don't know how his personality is outside of here, but I mean, everybody loves him. I don't like how he kind of got favorable, like, treatment, like in that situation where he had the pre, like, it was like one of those training camp games that like are joint training camp games. And then, he got into that fight with the Cincinnati Bengals, like a couple of offensive linemen. So like to me, as that goes on, he's much maligned in my book only because I'm a Cardinals fan. And I know that's probably the feeling for other franchises on the NFC West as well. As a person, as a player, I mean, it's really hard for me to say, but he is one of the members of that Mount Rushmore, because when it comes to like let's just say the defensive tackle and the stats and where he gets lined up at and where he rushes from, it's really hard to produce being that type of a player. Recently, I think it's only not Dexter Lawrence. It's Lawrence out from New York that's actually playing like that type of role, that's getting a lot of pressures and
Chris
being
Jones
rushed.
is the other too. He just got re-signed by the Chiefs, but those two guys, they're good.
Yeah, they're a dime a dozen out there. They're even less than that. So when you have somebody special, obviously you want to keep them. And let's be real, that if he didn't make that play on that fourth down, there's a good chance that's a touchdown, because Jamar Chase was open at the bottom of the
Classic Super
bottom of
Bowl.
formation. So he got right through, pressure Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow had to get rid of that ball, and game over. He got up. He showed us where he wanted his ring at, and I got pissed because I was going for the Bengals because I don't want the Rams to win, but they won. But I will say one thing about like what Kyler said. Kyler did really well in being able to evade that pressure from Aaron Donald. There's two plays that stick out in my mind. It was the 2021 win against the Los Angeles Rams. He was able to evade that pressure because he used his own aggressiveness against him. So obviously, every quarterback knows if you have somebody coming up, pressure coming up to your face, you just sidestep them. He did that very well. He found his target in Chase Edmonds on a few of those because he had that connection with them. So for him to say like, "Hey man, thank you," he's giving him like that whole like, "Dude, I got respect for you, man. I got a lot of respect for you." So I got nothing but love for you. And you know what? Props to Kyler for giving him that. But Kyler had some on Aaron Donald, and last year so did what's it called? So did James Conner. So I
Yep.
mean, I love those plays.
Yeah, no, that was definitely a place with Donald. He wasn't one of those 300-pound defensive tackles like the Vince Wilfork. He was one of those guys who, from what he even said, played at a lighter weight. So he's a guy at 250, 265, he's saying, shoving around these 300-pound guys just shows just the phenomenal strength and athleticism he had. Here is what Kyler Murray actually did say, at least here, saying, honored to have competed against the best of all time, Aaron Donald 97. Enjoy your retirement and please don't come back with that pray hands emoji. Very funny, I think, overall. And like we can say, it's both a combination of respect and how we sometimes can look at things on whoever's wearing this uniform we don't like, whoever's wearing this uniform we like. Sometimes when you look at the NFL as a whole, even with division rivals, it's good to at least be able to have a level of respect for them, even if you are technically not rooting for their success at the same level of rooting for your own team. I think that was at least a very classy move. Speaking of moves, the Arizona Cardinals do actually make another move. This is one that I think is going to be probably their most underrated move of the offseason, if I had to pick a name for it. They do at least bring in a veteran offensive lineman. So they have Evan Brown, who had played previously with the Seahawks, had played with other teams before. He started quite a few games overall at center. I think it was at least 60 or so games in the, let me double check at least for how much it was in the league as far as his number of starts, but he is a guy who played college football at, I think it was, Southern Methodist University, 6'2", 320-pounder. He can play both guard and he can play at center, which kind of also fits some of the athleticism that you like to be able to see from what we saw with last year. The Cardinals had Hjalte Froholt running around on different poles, getting him into open space. And it's very curious because he's bounced around a little bit for the most part with some of the times in the league, but he spent his most time the last couple of years, graduated to being a starter under the Lions in 2022, and then started 12 games in the 2022 season at right guard. And then he started with the Seattle Seahawks and won the starting center job over that fifth-round pick from Michigan. So you're looking at this guy going, okay, he's a right guard, he's a center. The Cardinals have a center. Cardinals have a right guard. Marcos, do you think that this could be a move that pushes Froholt to left guard? Could this be like a center move? Or do you think that this could be the Cardinals addressing their left guard position by going out and bringing in this guy on essentially a one-year deal with the Arizona Cardinals?
It opens up competition, that's for sure, especially when it comes to like the middle of and let's just be clear, the Cardinals have not addressed that middle part. And it's very important, especially for a short quarterback, to have that middle protection. So this is just bringing in more like competition. This is bringing more hitting the area with numbers with a person who's had experience as well, and somebody that could possibly hold. I mean, it doesn't hurt to sign these players to be able to like solidify that spot as on like, look, you're gonna compete for the starting spot. We're not giving it to you. You're not coming over here and just getting it as a starter. So you better like work your butt off to be able to get that starting position, and you better show up, to every single practice because if you're not producing, we're gonna put somebody else in that position. And so that's the message to everybody, and that's what needs to be clear. Like Froholt can't just be gifted that center position because even though he was able to hold it down, he wasn't able to hold it down like we thought he would, but he did a good enough job to keep that position. But he can't be comfortable thinking that he's going to be the center moving forward because he is getting up there in age, and we are looking for replacements in the draft. So they're hitting it with a two-pronged attack. They're going to hit it with veterans get some numbers in there, and then they're gonna hit it with the draft. Because I can guarantee you, there's gonna be maybe 1 or 2 offensive linemen taken in this year's draft by the Cardinals.
Yeah, what's interesting also about each of those players is neither of them are young, but they're not 30 something guys. I believe it was the Lions went out, signed Kevin Zeitler to a 1 year deal. He's in his almost in mid 30s. Froholt and Evan Brown are both 27 years old. We've seen the Cardinals have a pattern of signing guys who are kind of in that prime area of between age 25 to 30 where they could extend for a couple years if they end up panning out. You don't have to bring in a guy on a 1 year deal, see him walk to another team. There could be some more long-term stability as well. Overall, it feels to me like you're probably going to be putting him into competition. One of the things I think looking at the Cardinals depth chart right now, we usually use our lads. They don't have the direct depth chart from teams often, but they'll usually do a pretty good job of being able to kind of see what the current state of the team is. And a lot of that is with the Cardinals re-signing the likes of Elijah Wilkinson, Tristan Colon being re-signed. You can kind of see how they've been able to kind of flesh out a lot more of that offensive line where if Evan Brown is going to compete, honestly, they've got probably a hole at that left guard spot compared to where they could get by with where they were last year. But, Marcos, we talked about it through the season. Sometimes you saw Tristan Colon go out there and the Cardinals were better in run blocking. Other times Elijah Wilkinson had been poor. They seemed to get some consistency late in the season with Wilkinson. They also have, I believe, Will Hernandez is coming in. And now we've got this right tackle, left tackle thing between Jonah Williams and Paris Johnson. There's a lot I think that's more up in the air. I think that the Cardinals, they may have a plan, they just won't tell us what it is yet. Jonathan Gannon seems to like to keep things on the DL as it is, or be able to kind of keep it low key, just to be able to see whatever competitive advantage. And I kind of don't agree with it the same thing. I think the NFL is a league where you're not going to surprise guys so much as being able to go out and get those matchups in. But it does seem like, at least when you can take a look at how the Cardinals have addressed their needs, they've taken up a lot of guys, at least in the front of the defensive line. They've gotten a starter and a depth spot at the offensive line spot. They've gotten a cornerback over there with Sean Murphy Bunting. They don't necessarily have a left cornerback. They don't necessarily have a pass rusher, at least as far as for addressing that need. And the left guard spot probably needs to be upgraded. The biggest thing, of course, is they do sign a wide receiver in Chris Moore out of Tennessee. He's a guy that's going to be a depth signing and special teamer. And let's be honest, this is the biggest area, I think, right now for the Cardinals that you can look at. I think it was Jess Root of the Rise Up C-Red podcast, right for Cardwire, says that when you take a look, no Cardinals receiver that they have has ever had more than 600 yards receiving in a season. Even with the Cardinals wide receiver, Michael Wilson, who came in last year, he had 565. That's him. He's your second-year player. He missed time with health things last year. We've not been able to see Greg Dortch get a lot of snaps or production, even though he has produced for the past few years. He just hasn't produced at that level of kind of being able to lead the team in receptions, be a top target. This feels very much like with Hollywood Brown being gone, we can at least see where the Cardinals are probably going to address Marcos within the wide receiver, within maybe a left guard or an interior offensive lineman. We'll see if John Gaines is able to make some noise. And probably adding a pass rusher or cornerback. It seems to reason that the Cardinals were going to be addressing some of these spots anyway. Now it feels like there's a lot more reason to be able to bring this up, especially with a recent signing. We have I believe Austin Johnson, at least, who came in for a workout with the Arizona Cardinals yesterday. And today, of course, as of the news, he signs with the Buffalo Bills. He's a guy who would have been a defensive lineman, probably move out to edge for the Cardinals. So you're still looking for that veteran edge rusher. You're still looking for edge rush help in general. I think that we may, Marcos, be seeing some of this sign, but it does point a lot more to the Cardinals probably having to look at this in the draft if they are going to want to improve at this spot.
Yep, absolutely. That's the name of the game. Just get whatever you can in free agency. If you can't address it in free agency, then that's where the draft comes in. It's actually kind of like a situation where it doesn't it's not like good like draft like how would I say it? Basically like a strategy. There you go. Like it's not a the best draft strategy to just go in and then have to fill in needs, because that does lead to situations where you're trading up and trading down, trying to fill out spots because you need to like basically draft somebody. That's the situation that happened with Marco Wilson. We needed a cornerback. We needed to address the cornerback position because we didn't address it in years past, or we didn't get anybody that was going to be able to step up, or we didn't develop properly, like Byron Murphy, the playing in the slot
Yep.
the majority of his time instead of being out in corner. So we never got that like, okay, he's going to be a starter going forth. Now we just got to address the other side. So that's what led to us having to trade to get a Marco Wilson, who was a very athletic freak. He had his ups and
Mhm.
downs, but as we saw just this past season, you can't rely on just doing that all the time. And so
Right.
because we didn't hit that spot, well, you know what? We had to address it, and then we never really went back to the to it. We never drafted high enough for like a cornerback to be like considered somebody that we would have any type of faith with. We have a lot of like, hey, could be's or maybes type of players, but we still have to wait and see. Whereas like when you would have addressed it during free agency, like you should have, you didn't, and now we have to go to the draft and hopefully develop these players like they should be developed. So that is what the strategy is, unfortunately, but it is what it is because every team has needs and every team is going to compete. You're competing against other teams.
Yeah, exactly. That is one of the biggest things I think that stands out when you look at the Cardinals is, like you said, the draft capital that gets spent in different places in different positions. That's one of the areas that I think the Cardinals under Monty Austin for it, we've at least seen a bit of a different approach. When the Cardinals were picking up high in the NFL draft previously, we've seen them kind of spend their capital on top talent, but it's been a long, long time, honestly, since the Cardinals were bad enough to be at the top. They only have, if you take a look at least at the last, say, let's go with about maybe not quite, but almost 20 years or so of Cardinals first round draft picks, just because I think it's really interesting. You start at least with the Cardinals, and they move out in 88, and they're just not a great team. They just don't have the infrastructure to re-sign players to those deals. You can also see that they drafted running backs with their first few picks because that was one of the most important positions. Now it's been devalued in the NFL. I think it may come back a bit, but probably not to the same case of taking one top 7 overall. They really had spent a lot of capital on trying to find linemen, trying to find receivers. In 2003, they at least traded down from Terrell Suggs. You end up then knocking it out of the park over the next few years, of course, with the guys who would make the Super Bowl with Larry Fitzgerald, Antrell Roll, Levi Brown, Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie, and you can slide Matt Leinart in there in 2006. But really, the modern Arizona Cardinals kind of started back with that 2011 draft with Patrick Peterson after they took Dan Williams, who that was the last year that they had the old NFL contract situations where rookies would get giant guaranteed deals out of the gate. It's not a lot more slotted, at least. So you don't have guys holding out in camp. That was kind of where you saw at least the Carson Palmer era Cardinals with Bruce Arians, the Patrick Petersons, Michael Floyd. We got to see how they invested in an offensive lineman in Jonathan Cooper and invested in one in DJ Humphries. And then when Kyler Murray came in, linebackers for the next 2 years. They did at least bring in some help for him, but it really took up until this past year and the DJ Humphries that we knew now being released for the Cardinals to actually be able to go out and say, hey, left tackle, we know that we got one in DJ Humphries. We need to add another one. There's a 2-tackle type of a league. Investing into a lot of linebackers, you would see the Cardinals invest in a linebacker in the draft, pay them some of that doubling down. Marcos, the one thing I look at when I see this with the last few years is something very unique because the last defensive back the Cardinals drafted in the first round was the likes of Patrick Peterson. The last pass rusher that they drafted in the first round goes back even further to Calvin Pace back in 2003, which, say what you will about Hassan Reddick, he was not necessarily drafted to be a pass rusher. He is now. We'll talk about Reddick also a little bit and how the news has come out with some of that today, but same thing goes with Isaiah Simmons, Zaven Collins. The Cardinals really, really have not drafted that edge rusher for a long time. They could probably need a cornerback as well. When you're sitting here at this spot, we've talked about trade downs, talked about other stuff. Do you feel like that the biggest need for the Arizona Cardinals on the defensive side, would you argue with the likes of an Aaron Donald retiring, how he was able to generate pressure, that the Cardinals should get one of those guys they think has that pass rushing upside, or do we need to look at this young secondary that has Sean Murphy-Bunting and a couple of guys who were rookies last year and needs to go out and get that long-term, that franchise cornerback, similar to the one who was just traded in L'Jarius Sneed?
Yeah, man, that L'Jarius Sneed, that guy's a stud. Um, well, like I'm looking at this list as well, and of course, like I remember the drafts of past years and whatnot. Um, so for me, what I look at when it comes to this is there's three defensive backs that were drafted in the first round. Of course, you have Dan Williams, who was drafted in the first round as defensive tackle. You really don't know anybody else other than Robert Kamdiche, and that guy was a drop. So it was one of those picks that was like, hey, he
Yeah.
slid further than he was supposed to. So let's go ahead and take advantage. Same year that Chris Jones came out. That's really upsetting. But I mean, a lot of these guys, there was like at least one, two that I can see at the very least, like 2 or 3 were either misutilized or not put in the right, so there wasn't a plan for these people when they got drafted. That's the number one important thing about drafting a first rounder. You have to have a plan and you have to stick to it because you don't wanna ruin those years that you have as a rookie to be
Mhm.
able to develop them to be the players that they need to be, or you're just putting them in limbo, and that could really throw the trajectory off. The only one that I can see that actually panned out of that, you know, that whole, like, role, it wasn't even mostly a move that he had to make because he was really bad, but the only one that I can see that moved out was Antrel Roll, who was drafted
Mhm.
as a corner, but then he was moved to safety, and then we
Yep.
started seeing him produce with interceptions, interception returns, and whatnot. So that was the one that they had a plan for, and they just had to adjust because once he came into the league, he played corner, he wasn't that good of a corner. Then they moved him out to safety. Then he started becoming that, that free safety that we had that was just always around the ball no matter what.
Yeah.
Dominic Rogers Camardi, I really didn't have any qualms with that. I liked him as a player, so he was obviously traded away. And Patrick Peterson being the best one that we have, that is a Ring of Honor type of contender. After that, yeah, you addressed it with Deion Buchanan. You brought him in. You played him at safety, but they made him play like the linebacker
Linebacker,
position.
yep.
So
That new
yeah,
dollar backer that we
the
saw
dollar
take over
backer.
the NFL, and then it kind of faded out of fashion when it's like, "Oh, this is a 220-pound linebacker. We've got our 300-pound athletic offensive lineman who can just run him over." And that really was how teams adjusted to some of these new schematic things that we see because it's an always changing league.
Yeah, they picked him off and whatnot. The one room that I think is the most successful that we drafted in, so we have good luck in, and I think people should be happy about this. It looks like wide receiver was the one that we actually drafted and actually was able to at least get some development. Because even though Michael Floyd was much maligned, he did have a 1,000 yard season or a
Mhm.
couple, and he had some
Yeah.
pretty good he was a pretty good producer. So I'm not saying obviously he's not the player that we wanted him to be the long term, but when we drafted him opposite side of Larry Fitzgerald, I mean, that was a good tandem for like a while. And Michael Floyd was a deep threat in that type of system. So it just looks like we have good luck with wide receivers. It looks like we have somewhat luck, like bad luck and good luck. I guess you can say with like tackle or offensive lineman. We have bad luck with defensive tackle. We can't retain
Yeah.
those guys. Dan Williams was a mammoth in the middle, but we just couldn't retain that guy for whatever reason. Outside linebacker and inside linebacker, like we don't have a plan for those guys, and they don't end up playing well for us because we don't have a plan. And so from this list, I would say, I mean, we're talked about getting a wide receiver. I mean, I feel pretty good about that.
Yeah, it's one of those unique spots, I think, for the Cardinals where in years past, it felt like that the player that they needed was there. I think with going back, at least just with my covering or watching the Cardinals go through at the draft, I didn't truly get invested until they like really needed a quarterback way back in the 2010, 2011 season. They did make that trade of Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie to get back Kevin Cobb. Didn't end up panning out for either team, which is kind of unique for the most part. At least you don't get one of those trades where it feels like one side won, one side lost. It was kind of a no one really was able to like live up to what the need was for the team. But I agree with that. When it comes to wide receivers, when you got first round profiles, it's easy to be able to identify some of those guys. When it's offensive linemen, we've seen sometimes you get a guy who performs really well, like a DJ Humphreys, but it may be inconsistent. Jonathan Cooper looked like a slam dunk. He's ended up out of the league, while DJ Humphries ended up lasting longer than pretty much any Cardinals player for the most part. And when it comes to some of that identity, I do think that the Cardinals, if you look at where they've played in on that indoor field, where they would spray the ball around, even having that air raid offense, Bruce Arians offense before that, even going back all the way to the days of the Don Coryell offense, the Cardinals have just had this. We're not a snow team. We're going to be like more of an offensive juggernaut, and we're going to be fast on the defensive side of the ball. We've seen them under Jonathan Gannon take on a bit of a toughness. I do think that it would be interesting to see the Cardinals go into this draft and be able to find someone who's maybe not a true edge rusher, but maybe one of those guys who could be part of the rotation of defensive linemen who could line up on the edge, line up on the inside. There's a couple of guys that are like that we'll be able to talk about here in a bit. But first of all, I did want at least to make sure that we talked a little bit also just about some of the film, at least we've been going back over. I know you've been doing some of your film review for the most part, at least, with pretty much everything with Kyler Murray since he came back. This is against the San Francisco 49ers, if you want to kind of walk us through some of this.
I know this is gonna look like a subtle, like, well, why are you putting this up here for? This is like a standard, like, tight end screen that you're putting up here. There's a reason why I'm putting this up here, because of the athleticism that Trey McBride is showcasing here when he literally hops over one of the defensive backs. He just does not want to go down. So of course you see the orbit motion, fake the handoff. Here you go, do your thing, Trey McBride. Oh, yeah, you're not getting me. So like that's a rare type of feat
That's
for a
great.
tight end, because he timed it to the point where he knew he was going to go low on him, because he's a bigger guy. You have to go low on these type of players to tackle him down. He sees him. He's like, "Nah, you're not taking me down." And got that extra 2 to 3 yards, and it makes a huge difference. Now, it's a small play, but this is the type of stuff that I want to see more of in our offense. Because if you have a tight end that's athletic like this, you don't
Mhm.
have to put so much pressure in having to target this guy downfield all the time.
Right.
Just give him the ball and go. And that was the case with Zach Ertz as well. You can go ahead and let me know, like, what do you think about this play?
Yeah. It just makes me remind, I guess it gives a reminder that the Cardinals maybe not having a wide receiver one, it didn't mean that they were hopeless last year. Teams knew that they were going to throw the ball to Trey McBride. They were going to run the ball with James Conner. And we saw later in the season, teams were not really even able to stop that. I think that it's one of those cases of, like you are talking about, where you look at how he was able to produce last year. He wasn't featured in the offense until probably about week 5 or 6, even with how Zach Ertz was still catching some of those passes. And then he was in that full-time role, ended up with about 825 yards. That was 7th in the NFL. So here's kind of some of the players around that. You've got George Kittle and Travis Kelce obviously are the top two. You have David Njoku, excuse me, Sam Laporta. You also have the Cowboys' Jake Ferguson coming on strong. You've got the Bears, who locked up Cole Kmet to that big deal. And then the first round draft pick, Dalton Kincaid. The fact that Zach Ertz is up there, I think what we can look at and say, hey, we may not be able to project him to be quite as high as it was if the Cardinals do get more receiving help in the draft. But to look at him as technically the wide receiver 2 on this team, or at least the second receiver, in addition to Greg Dortch and a potential Marvin Harrison Jr., I think that it does feel like that would give you enough weapons on offense to be able to compete week in and week out. Because, like you said, he's a mismatch who he's effort in the blocking game to being able to run the ball with James Conner. We've seen him improve as a blocker from last year to this year, being able to then set up some of the pass, or even like on that play you just described. It looks like they're about to hand it off to the running back. They bring Rondale around the backside of the play as far as for having kind of an option to pass the ball in a reverse. The defense gets sucked up looking toward Rondale, looking toward the running back, and then really it's Trey McBride on a screen. He's able to use that athleticism, jump over, and get close to the first down marker. Like you said, part of the NFL is ultimately about not just finding talent at pick number 4, not just about doing well at pick 27, but McBride was taken with the 55th pick overall. He was a guy that was probably the top tight end in his class. He fell down to where the Cardinals were picking, and you've been able to see that's kind of the one draft pick that not only did it work out, but with Zach Ertz leaving and now he got signed to the Commanders, that's been one of those times where the Cardinals almost prepared for the future, brought in someone almost a year early versus scrambling for having to bring in a guy like the Hollywood Brown trade, where going into the 2022 season, you knew, hey, they went into 2021, they trusted some of their draft picks and AJ Green to be able to hold up. They're still going to run it back and trust AJ Green and some of those draft picks to hold up for the most part with 2021 and then 2022. And really, then when they did go ahead and make that move for the Hollywood Brown, I think that's kind of when you ended up seeing for the most part that the Cardinals were a year late in getting that young playmaking receiver in. The fact that Trey McBride at least looks to be a good part of this Cardinals offense is something I'm encouraged about. Speaking of encouragement, Marcos, if you want to go ahead and pull up, I know you got a second clip for us to be able to review today.
All right, I'm gonna pick out a random. So let's see. Hopefully, this is a good or
So this, I
or
like this. This will be the reboot random. I think reboot randomly generated. I think at least for our
random
play
generated.
watching.
Yep, AI generated clips. They're just they're not real. They're just made up. So I went through my wrong file. There we go. So let's see. Let's take a look at this next one. All right. So this is at the 21-yard. Let's go. Snaps the ball. He's in shotgun.
I was gonna say I
Goes
know
to,
what play this
okay, there we
was.
go.
This was the
There we
McBride
go.
slant. This is the McBride slant route. I knew that was going to be the case because I recognized this from the Pittsburgh game. So you essentially are going to be, and I believe it doesn't say what the down in yardage is, but I remember this being one of the completions that made me think, okay, like Kyler is on. He had been driving the ball down the field, going to McBride. This was where they go and they fake the ball, at least I believe, to DeMercado at the start. They throw the ball, and McBride is just able to get open against the linebacker, like pretty much right away. They end up doubling him with Minka Fitzpatrick coming over the top. Actually, I think it is is at 38. It might be a defensive back who is there, I think, at least as well. And yeah, it's a defensive back that they have on him. So essentially, you're getting a mismatch where Trey McBride, he not only is able to get off of the ball, but they kind of have him lined up like this is like your X receiver type of spot for the most part. If you're looking at it, he's got a guy lined up against him in press on the outside, right,
Yeah, he's the next.
Marcos, you've got your Z guy on the other side. And when you go ahead and see the play run, they just immediately bring the one guy in pass protection. They got someone opening stuff up underneath. You see that the linebacker moves to try to protect the running back and get in the way of the throw. McBride makes it look easy where there's not any type of issue. He gets the inside shoulder and is just able to make a nice cut to get the ball, pick up a few yards after the catch. I'm impressed, at least for the most part, not just with how Trey McBride was here, but this is a simple bread and butter play in the NFL. And that's something that you want to see some of these with Kyler standing tall in the pocket, throwing it over the middle of the field. That is what wins in the NFL.
Yeah, that's a lot of like that's just timing 101 right there. He knew when he was getting off the ball. So you're right. He is lined up at X. He's kind of lined up not really as an attached tight end, because then that would mean he would be in a 3-point stance. So he's in his 2-point stance. He has the corner up on the line of scrimmage. So yeah, he is in an X position. So that's why like tight ends that are special like him, they have enough trust to put him out there to play the wide receiver position. He's not playing tight end right now. He's playing wide receiver. And he's able to win that leverage battle by being able to like get off the line of scrimmage, kind of he uses kind of like a diamond release, fakes going outside, goes back inside, wins the leverage battle. He has a bigger body, so he's winning that, and he has a longer reach. So that was just a mismatch right there. And Kyler Murray, whenever he looks, so before he even like takes the snap, when he's surveying the field, which is why the shotgun is like a preferable like formation to a lot of quarterbacks, when he's looking to his left and to his right, he's seeing what his matchups are. And if he likes his matchups, he's gonna throw it. Well, who can you match Trey McBride with in this situation? Are you gonna put a defensive end out there to go and like try to survive on a type of zone drop or whatever? Are you gonna put a corner out there in a press formation to try to jam him at the line of scrimmage and slow him down? Or are you going to put a safety? I mean, this is why they say, it's a mismatch league and stuff. And even though like these two plays are just subtle. So the first one was about like, good tight ends have yak ability. This one right here, he's able to win this one-on-one. And if he's able to do that for his quarterback, that's like a slam dunk situation. And you can show the trust. I mean, he he doesn't even think about where he's gonna throw it. He does his little 2-3 step drop, and then he's already like cranking it, throwing it over the middle. This is something that's great looking forward for like the offense, but knowing that you have Trey McBride as that like for sure target that's like a winner over the middle that can beat like any type of a mismatch. I mean, that's why I keep bringing him up and talk about how excited I am for Trey McBride.
Yeah, we haven't scratched the surface yet of Trey McBride. We got to see a bit of it last year. And later in the season, I think when teams keyed in and started having to double team him so that the Cardinals were having to force to go elsewhere, we saw them just be able to run the ball effectively and being able to put Kyler in different places to succeed. And he still was able to get the ball to Trey McBride for a couple of great touchdowns to end the season. Thanks for helping us go over. Well, again, go over film every single week, at least with part of the Redbird reboot. Now, let's pivot a bit and talk about the draft, because even though it's still just about a month out, it's like 35, 34 days left before the NFL draft, there's been so much, at least, of people looking at different trade possibilities for the Arizona Cardinals. One of the biggest ones, at least, that we saw from this last week was from Daniel Jeremiah, who's basically the NFL's I don't want to call him like the godfather of the NFL draft, but I think that he's probably, for most people like me growing up, he's probably the biggest NFL draft expert that there is in a public sphere, who works like an actual NFL scout. We also have other guys like Dane Brugler or people who are there, but with someone like Jeremiah, who is able to put out mock drafts each year, who's able to put up different rankings, you can at least go back and check what a lot of the work that he's done in other places. It's a great time to be able to follow him if you're an insider. He had a unique mock draft because he said, I want to create chaos the night before. And then the next day he posted a GIF on Twitter or X of a city burning. So you're like, oh yeah, he's choosing the chaos here. What we can look at here is the mock draft, which has what most people are calling is kind of what we expect to be with the first 4 picks, or at least the first 3 picks, I should say. Caleb Williams at number 1 to the Bears, very clearly going to happen after they traded Justin Fields. The second overall pick, he had Drake May here there, but didn't have as much clarity. In his last mock draft, he had Jaden Daniels. Most NFL insiders do expect the Commanders to take Jaden Daniels. I think looking at Cliff Kingsbury, you can obviously say, yeah, that makes sense. And then the Patriots, from everything we've seen for the most part, we know that the Vikings have looked to trade up with them. Here he has them taking Jaden Daniels. And then you've got the 4th quarterback taken, J.J. McCarthy, in a projected trade with the Arizona Cardinals. He then gives them pick 23, gives them pick number, I believe it is 11 as well, where they are able to trade. And what's interesting about this is that he has another trade up, at least at the very next pick, still has Arizona keeping their pick. He has them taking Jared Verse with the 11th overall pick. And then they get, of course, I would believe either a 3rd next year if you're going to trade back for less, a 1st next year for the most part, or you're going to be able to see at least another couple of things go on. So with the trade with the Vikings, he gives them their wide receiver with Brian Thomas Jr., passes on an offensive lineman or 2, and then he gets them Byron Murphy, the second, the defensive tackle out of Texas, for that last pick in his 1st round mock draft. So the first thing, Marcos, I think that when we can look at this, you can say, hey, a lot of Cardinals fans have said we don't really want to trade back. A lot of us would want to keep Marvin Harrison Jr., but a lot of people have also talked about a price. So if there's a price for the Cardinals at number 4, could there be a price that you think the Cardinals fans would be willing to accept? Because last year, I think I was a guy who was very adamant saying, don't trade down. Take the best player in the draft. Will Anderson is there. Go ahead and take him, because I don't think you're going to get anything worth that in trade value. And when the Houston Texans then gave up not the Browns' 1st round pick, but their own 1st round pick, a lot of people went, oh, wow, that is a haul. You may get a top 5 pick out of that. Now, we know that's not the case, but ultimately, do you think last year what the Cardinals did was the right move? And if they were to do another move like that this year, what do you think the cost should or would be?
Yeah, I'm actually torn, and it's because hindsight's 2020. So obviously we knew what Will Anderson became, and he became one of like the stud pass rushers that he was projected to be. So it's one of those situations where let's go back to right after it happened. So like let's just say, okay, it just happened and he traded back. I was for the trade back. So once he traded back and I was thinking to myself, okay, stick and pick, whatever comes to you. You need to fill in certain positions, but just get the best player out of the need that you have. So that way you're still keeping that second, what was it, like we had back to back like second round picks. They were, I think it was pick 33 and pick 32. Those are really prestigious positions that we could have filled in, or I mean, eventually we traded back from there. And then when I heard the news that we traded back down and we gave up a pick, like the second round pick, and we traded out of that second round pick anyway, I thought to myself, well, those positions I'm not sure. You can correct me if I'm wrong about this, but I think Joey Porter Jr. was still available when the
Mhm.
Cardinals were going to pick in the second round. So that was a need and obviously Joey Porter has become not only a cornerback that looks like he's going to take over that cornerback position for the future for the Steelers, but that was a position of need that we needed desperately, and plus we needed a center. So that's what I felt. Obviously, later on in the season, they traded away Josh Jones, who showed he could play the left tackle position and he could play it admirably. When I saw him play that left tackle position in 2022 and hold it down, with the exception of the penalties, I thought to myself, that's DJ's replacement right away. So you move off
Mhm.
of him immediately. And if you want to draft yourself a tackle, do so. So that didn't happen. So when we traded back down to get Paris Johnson, then I talked to myself and said, well, now this pick has to pan out for the likes of what Monty Onsafor did. So he did something that people aren't going to argue about. They're not going to say that was a horrible pick. You picked an offensive tackle. Most of the people who follow football are going to say that's not a great pick, as in like exciting, but it's a
Mhm.
pick that you like do because it's a fundamental pick. You're doing something that's
Yeah.
important. And if you're adding somebody that's as talented as Paris Johnson, and let's say he ends up working out, well, there you go. You set that position for the years to come. So to me, I was like thinking to myself, okay, well then I want him to succeed. So put him at his best position that he can succeed in. Well, they put him at right tackle. And to me, after hearing all this hindsight, I thought to myself, you know what? Let's just stick and pick, like, and that's how I kind of feel about this year, even though I have a little bit of bias because of last year, what happened. I kind of just want to stick and pick because if they're going to give us a most likely you're not gonna get, like, the big haul that you think you're gonna get. You might get, like, 1 or 2 first round picks, that's fine, but once again, you're hinging what's gonna happen if that franchise ends up playing well and going to the playoffs like last year when we thought
Mhm.
the Texans were gonna be horrible. They ended up becoming a playoff-bound team, and that first round pick they traded to,
It's
like, it
true.
looks like a steal on their end. They're like, "Yeah, we took a player that looks like a Hall of Famer or, like, a Hall of Fame trajectory player, and we gave you like our late first round pick. Have like good luck trying to replace that with that second first round pick we gave up. We're good."
Yeah, no, it's a unique spot, I think, for the Cardinals because, like we said, we only can look at hindsight in 2020. I think that what's interesting for the most part, at least, is there's a lot of people who I don't think are wrong if they do want to trade back. There's a lot of people I think are right. I think the biggest difference, obviously, is the same thing that you just said there. If the Cardinals had stayed at that draft pick in the 2023 NFL draft at pick 12, the best players on the board would have been someone like Lucas Van Ness or taking a Broderick Jones, who had an okay season. Maybe you take a corner and Christian Gonzalez, but then you're probably locked into an offensive lineman this year. By being able to move back and then back up in the draft, I think that you could probably paint a picture of success. The top three receivers are rated very, very well for the most part here. But the question then is, how good are they comparatively? Could you say that trading back from a Will Anderson and then up for a Paris Johnson could be just as good as trading back from a Marvin Harrison Jr. and then maybe up again for a Roma Dunze type? I think the way that I like to think of it, Marcos, is I like to think of it as this is where you're talking about the chefs. Like we've seen memes at least about that that say "Let Monty cook." Like we've seen him, people have photoshopped him in a chef hat. So like using that as a metaphor, I think of if you're looking for a steak dinner. So like a good steak dinner, it's gonna have like there's gonna be a drink that you'll have, but you're gonna have the protein, the meat. You're going to want to make sure at least that that's nice and tender. You're going to have probably some side of carbs like the potatoes. Here you can see they got some loaded baked potatoes.
I'm getting
That's
hungry.
got to be the vegetables. So Alex Clancy, who I know we had on a few weeks ago, at least from Locked on Cardinals, says the Cardinals need to eat their vegetables, talking about getting offensive linemen and getting people in there. And I think the question then at least is, all right, well, if you need to get your vegetables and you've been able to at least address some of that with the defensive line. What does a wide receiver rank as? Is that just the carbs that it puts on the side? Is that something that you just, the lines are going to be that type of veggie? I think the way that I would look at it is when you look at how the NFL works and you look at how these teams are winning, every team kind of does need someone for the quarterback to throw to who teams are just not going to be able to cover. Everyone from Patrick Mahomes to Travis Kelsey, with even back in the days with Tyreek Hill or with Mike Evans, with Tom Brady. These have been some of the guys the last few years. You can talk about what Jonathan Gannon knows. When the Eagles went and took Devonta Smith over at number 6 overall and then traded for A.J. Brown, we saw them immediately be able to become a huge time playoff contender that made it to a Super Bowl. I think one of the things that we can say is, what is your wide receiver 1 and wide receiver 2? And I think if you're going to look at that steak meal, I think that a wide receiver 1 is part of the protein. It's a highly valued position, just along with quarterback, with left tackle, with pass rusher. That's one of those things that is part of a protein. I think when you're talking about just any wide receiver, can you find some of those guys? Sure. Like, you may be one of those guys who's like, hey, I'd like to order something off the menu. You order a steak, you order something else on the side. Oh, wow. You got a steak and shrimp combination. You didn't expect that was going to be there. It tastes actually pretty good. You found a guy around 3 or 4. But I think that those second and third wide receivers, those other weapons, that's more of the potatoes, I think. The question, I think, Marcos, is to you. Do you think that a Marvin Harrison Jr. or a wide receiver 1 type, is that something that's a protein that the Cardinals need when Monty's assembling this dish? Or do you think that it's still more built around the lines, the other positions, at least even just building up a solid defense overall, needing to be kind of the Cardinals continue to eating their vegetables, or just being able to say, hey, you know what? It's Marvin Harrison Jr. Splurge on a few potatoes. Why don't you? What are your thoughts, at least on that?
Well, let's talk about that Eagles team for a minute because
Hmm.
you're right. So obviously, once they assemble those 2 wide receivers, their offense just exploded and they became the Super Bowl contender they are. What people will say argument wise is like, well, yeah, they had the ability to do that because they had their offensive line assembled. So like they got the first, like basically the potatoes already in that, and then they were able to get their steak, and that's what a lot of people say argument wise. However, what I'm going to say about that line is, if you really look at that line, there are 2 first round picks, I believe, or 1 first round pick that's still
Hmm.
holding steady at that line, and
Hmm.
it's Lane Johnson, the one of the best, either the best right
Good
tackle
point.
in the league or one of the best right now. And everybody else is littered with like either 3rd round, 2nd round, 7th round, with Mailata being that freak, and then you have the 6th round and Jason Kelsey. So I think like what I try to iterate it when it comes to offensive line, I think it has a lot to do with coaching and culture, and also
Hmm.
hitting it with numbers, like developing these offensive linemen. Because I think I was reading about like research, and it had to do with offensive schemes now. So with offensive linemen not needing to block as much because you have faster wide receivers, you have crazier concepts that get these wide receivers open and whatnot, like the
Hmm.
Shanahan situations where like
Right.
he's just like a mastermind at getting people open. These offensive linemen, like they're like, how should I say, their value is starting to like kind of teeter and come down to the point where you want offensive linemen to be good. You don't want them to be bad, obviously,
Hmm.
but you want them to be good. And if you have somebody that's a bad offensive lineman and you can make him good, that's great value.
Yeah,
And
that's
being
that's
able
part
to
of coaching sometimes,
pipeline.
of being able to have that pipeline, take someone who's maybe
Hmm.
not the same value as someone else, being able to either flip that for another team, or it's kind of one of those areas of when people talk about business, people always like to talk about like, what does a profit margin look like? Well, obviously it's a place where if I've got a lemonade stand and I pay 50 cents to be able to make the lemonade, squeezing the lemons into that one, pay a little bit for the sugar, for the cups, and then I give out the cups at $1 each. Well, that's a little bit of extra money. So then you can go back and you can do something else. The NFL, it's a lot the same way, where there are talent margins between teams. A team last year like the New York Jets, when they lost Aaron Rodgers and went from him to Zach Wilson, is not going to be able to stand up to a team that still has Patrick Mahomes, to the point where Mahomes, he didn't really have a true wide receiver 1 until later in the year with
Yeah.
a rookie. And I think that's something that's very interesting to note, is you have to be able to not just be able to cook the meal, but what I've always talked about too is there's two types of restaurants. One, it can be like the salad menus where they can kind of cook about anything. Like maybe it's like you want to go to Applebee's and it's like, it's not going to be like the best, but you're going to at least be able to know what kind of a meal you're getting. And it's going to be pretty complete. Like I could be hungry for tacos. I could be hungry for that steak. I could just maybe want a bowl of, kids mac and cheese. Why not? Those are all different things that you can get from a
Hmm.
local restaurant. But there's also restaurants where it's like, hey, you got to go to this place and you've got to try their reverse fried steak, like or reverse seared steak. Like they do an awesome job. So that would be the idea of a specialty dish. Specialty dishes are something that can be a lot more expensive, but they can also bring you a lot more business, a lot more money. And one of the things I think for the Arizona Cardinals is that for years they had one of these special dishes. His name was Larry Fitzgerald. They had an identity that was built. He was like the guy that was the face of the Cardinals, being able to just hustle, being able to make those great catches. It didn't matter who was throwing him the ball. He had guys like John Skelton or Ryan Lindley, or, we'll talk about early, like even early career Josh McCown throwing him the football. And he still was able to make plays. I think when it comes to the Cardinals, you got to weigh and see what's more important. Do you think a team that can kind of function fully or a specialty dish? I think, Marcos, where the Cardinals are building, I think you're at a spot where you kind of want both. You want to make sure you can be able to have, and I think last year they traded down maybe from a specialty dish to a solid, maybe specialty dish. We'll see how he does this year in
Yeah.
Paris Johnson. I do think that when you look around the league, you can't be an NFL team without one or two of those specialty dishes. You obviously need to have one at quarterback to be able to win in the NFL. But you also need to have like the Christian McCaffreys of San Francisco, the retired Aaron Donald. And I think the question for a lot of Cardinals fans is there actually a cost that they would be willing to say no to one of those specialty dishes to try to see if they could get the rest of their menu kind of up to snuff, as it were? So, with that in mind, I kind of did a little experiment this week, which we can go through with some poll results. So, we sent out a
Sweet.
couple of polls, at least earlier in this, early in the week, talking to Cardinals and Vikings fans. So let's say that the Cardinals are getting offers for number 4. Let's say that the Vikings, they called the Patriots. Patriots are taking a guy at number 3. Maybe the Patriots, we were assuming that they're going to be taking Drake May. Maybe they do take a JJ McCarthy, and suddenly it's Drake May. Or in a weird situation, maybe Jaden Daniels falls. So we ran this poll result, about 105 votes, which is, about a sample size. And most people agreed, if the Cardinals are going to trade, would you take a pick 11 and then a 2023 third to move to pick number 5? So here's what we're talking about. You move back, let's say, with the Vikings, and then you kind of give up one of your picks to go to pick 5 to still get Marvin Harrison Jr. Do you take Jordan Addison, the wide receiver, or do you just take that 2025 first? And I think a lot of it, for the most part, as far as meeting in the middle, maybe you want to talk about if the Cardinals were to trade back with the Giants at pick 6 and get a third round pick and then still get one of those top 2 wide receivers. It's kind of a similar thing as far as with moving back that spot. But most fans, Marcos, they agreed, and it wasn't a clear decision. 41% thought it would be needing that 2025 first round pick. 34% wanted Jordan Addison, and in order to be able to move back to 11 and 23, and there was about 25% of people wanted the Cardinals to say, hey, let's see if you can trade back, but then trade up as high as you can, give up that third round pick. Maybe you even give up that pick 27 that you have. What are some of your thoughts, at least, about what would be an optimal trade value? And again, this is ruling out the Cardinals staying put. Do you think that there is a good enough trade offer that would be here? Because I think this poll result showed Cardinals fans, they would take Jordan Addison, but a lot of Cardinals fans would really want to value that 2025 first round pick overall as well. And Vikings fans, who also voted in this poll, they didn't want to give Jordan Addison up. They would rather give up that first round pick. What do you think, at least with how the Cardinals could maybe go into this negotiating process?
From all 3 of those choices, I would pick third to move up to 5, mostly because of the fact that like the talent is so great, and the talent in this draft, especially in the top 5 or top 10, it's looking like you can almost not even miss on anybody. Almost. I'm saying that with quotations because you never know what can happen. So like when you give yourself those options, let's just say you move back from 4th and then you give up that pick, they get their quarterback, you move back down, you got 2 first round picks for next year, and you still get your guy. I mean, you can't lose with that.
Good.
I don't know about Jordan Addison. I mean, Jordan Addison had a good season last year, and he looked like somebody that could be good next to Justin Jefferson. But I want something that's like going to be a for sure, more so than like, how do we even know Jordan Addison's going to be a good number one, even though he did play well as that number one role. We don't even know like if that system that he's playing with is making him better than it would be in a different system. So I would just rather just get our own guy and mold him. And for their first for next year, like once again, you never know. They might have themselves like a playoff team. They could be playoff bound. So I'm like not even like excited about that situation anymore, unless I know they're going to be bad.
No, I agree with you there. So, this is the end of poll number one. A lot of people like, hey, like we need an option to stay. We need to see something else. So that was more just gauging: do Cardinals fans and Viking fans could we agree on giving up a Jordan Addison? I think with you that he's a guy that is a deep threat is really cool. Maybe you could say, hey, we get Jordan back. We could maybe then go out and get the bigger X receiver guy and like pick 35 maybe. I think that a lot of Vikings fans, though, were saying, hey, we're trading up for this rookie quarterback. We've got Justin Jefferson we're looking to re-sign, and we had Jordan Addison last year. Like, we want to put him in a good situation to succeed. So here's the kind of the next choice, at least the next day I put out, which was, hey, which would you rather have? The 2025 first from the Vikings or Jordan Addison, or stay put instead? Now, we had about 47% of people wanted to stay put, and majority of Cardinals fans still wanted that 2025 first. I think, at least like you said, a lot of Cardinals fans, if that's going to be the offer, it does feel like a lot of these mock drafts, I've seen the Cardinals moving back to get 11 and 23, and then they get a third rounder like next year, maybe a third rounder this year. I've seen some people who said, hey, you give me that 2025 first. That's not enough. I would need to get a third this year and a third next year, because the Cardinals, at least when negotiating with this, would be negotiating with a team that doesn't have a second round pick this year or next year. They gave those up to get that 2023 pick. And then there was about 8% of people wanted to see the results, which led to the final day of polls, about 117. Overwhelming 76.9% of people wanted to stay put and take Marvin Harrison Jr. over pick 11, pick 23, and the 2025 first. So I think at the end of the day, Marcos, the interesting question here is that seem like it doesn't seem to quite make sense for some people that you're taking 3 first round picks and saying no for one player. But on the other hand, it does really feel like if you're having to drop that far back from a player you've kind of identified, and this comes from some draft guys such as Trevor Sikkema, and others who have talked about Marvin Harrison Jr. Some teams may have a higher receiver on their board, but there's other people who have done this for a long time that are saying, hey, he is right up there with some of the top talents at wide receiver that we've seen over the past decade. Passing on someone like that when you need a wide receiver one, you just lost Hollywood Brown. It feels a lot like, I understand what Cardinals fans are saying, that there are guys that you probably shouldn't pass on. You want to take a look at the top prospects, at least. This is from at Marcus Mosher, taking a look at who are the best wide receiver prospects since 1990, before either of us were born. You got Larry Fitzgerald, Calvin Johnson, probably the top, Keyshawn Johnson going number 1 overall, AJ Green, who's been compared to Marvin at least plenty of times in 2011, Jamar Chase in the 2020 NFL draft, and Marvin Harrison Jr. So you're talking about probably out of the top wide receivers that we've seen for past 30 or so years, Marcos, he's in the top 5, if not top 6. Maybe it'd even be higher depending on how we know about Keyshawn Johnson, who had a great career for the most part. That's one of the things where I think it makes sense for a lot of Cardinals fans that I don't know if you can afford to pass on a talent like this.
And you also know that there's this big so with all those players, they all have the same type of like, not typecast like what they are, but they have some familiar type of like, you know, like not status, but like I'm saying like how they're built and what they are best at or what they're good at. Like I mean, I can't say that for Jamar Chase. He doesn't have great hands, but most of those guys on that list, great hands, can get open. And as far as Jamar Chase, he's just a freak. So I don't even know what to say about that guy. He's just a freak. Everybody else. So with Marvin Harrison being touted this high, as always, we have no idea how his career is going to end. But can we like look at him and think to ourselves, yeah, I have a lot of confidence that this guy's not only going to be that next great wide receiver, but he has it built in his family. I mean, this guy grew up with his own dad playing so well for the Colts, being somebody that was put up for I think he's a Hall of Famer, I believe.
Yep.
And with all that outside noise and whatnot, he had a great career. He also had a great quarterback throwing it to him, but he made some spectacular catches. I remember watching him in the early like 2000s, him laying out and catching the ball. And that's what I picture with his own son. So his son's gonna grow up with that like his entire life. That's what he was born to do, quote unquote. He took on with his dad's profession. He's bigger. I'm not sure if he's faster than his dad was, but he even though he has a slight frame, he has kind of the same play type of tendencies. And the one thing I will say about Marvin that I like and him and Odunze have in common is Odunze is a better 50-50 ball catcher, but Marvin
Mm.
Harrison is not afraid to get physical. He is not afraid to be physical at the line of scrimmage. I've seen corners play at press coverage and try to jam at the line of scrimmage, and he shrugs it off with these type of moves that allow him to be able to shrug off the side. But he doesn't try to like evade the physicality. He goes into it. So that's the last thing that he checked on for me. So I can understand why people want to stay put. I can understand why people are just saying, you know what, just keep it simple. He's right there. If he's right there, just take him. Don't make this any harder than you have to, because it would be great for Kyler Murray to have a receiver like that too, because that can also help him out in this offense going forward.
It just feels like it's a perfect fit, honestly. This is one of the times where last year I felt like the Cardinals did need a pass rusher, but they probably, when we look at things, needed an offensive lineman a bit more. A little bit of a news update that's kind of interesting because I know there's still Cardinals fans who are probably feeling like they're out of the woods with the Chicago Bears taking Caleb Williams at number one. Some people have wondered, could the Bears try to trade up at least from the number 9 spot to pick number 3? And with that second round pick they gave up, I just don't know if they're going to be able to have the capital. And I don't see an NFL team trading back from a quarterback like Drake May or Jaden Daniels all the way down to 9. Or that's just how it is with the likes of the Patriots this year. It just feels very different. Now, one of the things we can go over, at least as far as with Marv, that people have talked about is who is probably the better of the receivers for the most part. Is it going to be a fact that is Marvin really up there with some of these all-time prospects? And I think that what you're talking about, some of it as well, Marcos, is it's not just necessarily talking about and saying a lot of times what you see on film, but there's also things that can go in that sometimes are not necessarily on film, but sometimes context that is there. So I wanted to show at least this clip that from Nate Tice that shows a Marvin. He ends up working into the slot for the most part. He's in single coverage. And when he gets off, essentially, he's able to bait the corner and get off of the press coverage, immediately be able to break on the inside. You're kind of able to see that he's going up against a more athletic corner. He's not having to run these, far outside routes or some of these others. You're talking about some of what we saw Trey McBride run last year. And you also can see one of the interesting cases with him. We saw this a lot with Kyler Murray back, especially in the 2020 season, but the slot fade is something that we have not really seen that much. When they shifted, we thought that we were going to see that with Hollywood Brown. We thought we were going to see that maybe even with Rondale Moore. The slot fade is something where coming out of the slot, you're able to get a pretty free release. You fake like you're going to go inside, or maybe you end up just keep running that ball straight. You have to have a certain level of speed to be able to keep that up and over the top. And what we see, at least with Marvin Harrison Jr., is he's able to, going up against a speedier athletic corner, still get a step over the top and be able to kind of be one of those deep threat weapons, which is important because when DeAndre Hopkins was with the Cardinals, we saw how they used him a lot as being that sort of a player. We haven't seen it as much, at least with Hollywood Brown mostly working outside. Since he was the number 1 receiver for the Cardinals, he had to kind of work those routes in Cliff's offense, and even in this Cardinals offense last year.
Yeah, I mean, ball tracking skills are like underrated. People don't like some people don't understand what that actually means. So let me just explain what I mean when I talk about ball tracking. So you have this kind of like cohesion with your quarterback. You know the type of throws he's gonna throw, and you have to have the same communication with him. If you know he's the type of quarterback that's just gonna throw it like soft and put it in an area where he knows you're gonna catch it because he trusts that you're gonna catch it, ball tracking skills means how well can you run your route and know where the ball is at all times, because you obviously have to run the route, but you also have to make sure that you know that on this particular route, if he gives you the signal, the ball's coming to you, you better look for the ball. So you turn your head and you with most of the time with these situations, you have a corner draped on you like you did just in that play yourself. You're not going to be wide open per se. You're going to
Yeah.
be draped with the cornerback. You have to be able to beat that corner because that
Right.
corner may not be turned around to go look for the ball. He's just
Yeah.
trying to get you in coverage. He's trying to get a PBU. He may not know where the ball's even being thrown, but you do. So with that being said, if he's going to be draping you with his physicality, are you able to locate the ball, catch it, and come down with it? Because those are the 3 steps: locate, catch, and come down. If you can check all
Yeah.
those boxes, then that's what makes a great receiver a great receiver. And not every receiver has that talent.
Right.
And that's one
Agreed.
of the things that, most often the best receivers in the league have that type of talent.
Yeah, one of the things you brought up there, I think too, was when the Cardinals drafted Andy Isabella in the second round. I actually like the idea of Andy Isabella because I was like, he's a guy who can run deep routes, he can get open. We got to be able to see at the college level him kind of just be that do-it-all guy for that Massachusetts team. Well, one of the things in the NFL that became an issue was because of the smaller size and because of some of the catching in the camp, we saw him be much more of a body catcher. Like he would kind of cradle the ball within his body, and we would see over the middle when he was running those types of slot routes, defensive backs would hit him, the ball would just get jarred free because he's having to use his body, and some of that comes with not having the biggest hand size. I think that when we also saw with some of the routes that weren't quite there, but the anticipation was one of the things that when we watched it in Harrison Jr., it is very, very like almost elite caliber. In the very first clip, at least, that I think that you were talking about, Marcos, we're able to see how he's just able to slow up his ability when he's kind of running down the side of the line to kind of catch that ball and then being able to, like you said, having the not just anticipation, but being able to adjust to it in midair is a very difficult athletic feat. Now that, of course, it brings to the question for some people, which has been cool. He didn't actually go and work out for anyone. Is that something that we should care about? The Marvin Harrison Jr. is just saying, no, I'm not even going to end up like working out for teams. I'm just getting ready for the season. His dad came out and defended that from him. Do you think that with everything that we know so far, is that more of a character flaw where you'd or is that more of a place of we probably are looking at someone who is taking maybe the future of the NFL draft by saying, hey, all the results are on the tape. I'm going to start working out for the season rather than saying that I need to be drafted by a team as high as possible. Maybe a team that's super high has already kind of promised him that they're going to draft him there. What do you think, at least, about that non-working out? Because that seems to be the one spot that's holding him back from some of these other guys. And I will say that while people have looked at the contested catch rate in some of the other spots with guys like Adunze and others, it does seem like a lot of the time their players are acting out of that information with what the league has kind of said. There's a couple of guys who have put Malik Neighbors as their wide receiver one for some teams. He can get yards after the catch. He's got probably a 4.2 speed, at least for the most part. We've been able to see him produce with having a top quarterback. One of the things with Marv that I think I was talking with, I know this is back with we had on our podcast, Walter Mitchell is like, hey, like, well, Marvin didn't seem to be the same type of athlete in 2023 that he was in 2022. And there's a reason for that. Marvin, and I think it was week 1 or 2, had a grade 2 ankle sprain that he actually didn't end up missing any games the rest of the season for. So he's playing through an ankle sprain, still put up 1,200 yards. I think that within some of the context of with athleticism, he does profile as a better athlete than Rome. Some of it's different too. A lot of people, why do they like him so much more over Rome? You throw him, he'll catch anything, he'll fight the ball for you. A lot of times I'll see Rome, and I watched with this against Michigan. You can even watch the Michigan State game between Rome and Marvin Harrison Jr. They were the same team, the same opponents that they played. Well, with Rome, you can see he's always open. You can throw him the ball, but Marv is actually able to get a bit more separation where he didn't have to make as many contested catches as Rome Odunze did because he was just able to get that step. I don't think that there's enough of a difference between the two where I'm going to like plant my flag and say, this is how it's got to be. Like I planted a flag for Pat Mahomes in 2017. I planted a flag at least in the 2000 and I think it was 2019 season saying, yeah, you got to take Kyler Murray. I'm not that going to plant a flag at least and saying that, like, if you're going to say that trading back and then trading up for Rome is going to be a better move for that 2024, 2025 first round pick combination, I'm not going to necessarily plant a flag there, but I will plant a flag and say, if you've got an opportunity to take a potential generational receiver prospect and pair him with Kyler Murray, I think that that would be what I would do. And I feel like that the Cardinals, it wouldn't shock me if they think the same way as well.
Yeah, and let's talk about Roma Dunze as well because I don't know if people are very versed about this guy, but he is like what I would consider probably the second best option at wide receiver for Kyler Murray. Not for every team, just for Kyler Murray. And
Mm,
being in a situation where you do you do get a first round pick and then you end up with Roma Dunze, that would be a great situation too. I just want people to get I'm not saying that's what I would do. I'm saying like if that's what the result is, I want people to still know that you should get excited because Roma Dunze has a really good contested catch rate and he does have the big body and he does have the fluidity to run routes the right
yeah.
way. Obviously, the big, name out there, Marvin Harrison Jr. Obviously that would be preferable, even though that all that stuff is rubbing me the wrong way about his personality because he's making business decisions. He's saying to himself, "Why am I going to go work out if you know who I am? You know who my father is." And his father's obviously getting in his ear. Another
Mm,
situation where like these kid athletes are coming into the league and their father's basically their agent. That's happening
yeah.
with Caleb Williams right now. His father's his agent. I mean, we had that situation with Kyler Murray as well. His father's his agent. So these guys are looking for the best for their kids. And who wouldn't? If your son's going to the NFL, you want the best for him, obviously. So that's what they're going to do for him. So if you have somebody telling him like Marvin Harrison, like you're gonna be one of either the top wide receiver or a top 5 pick no matter what. You don't have to go work out. You don't have to risk getting hurt. You can just
Mm,
watch the film, and from the film, you can make your decision. But I'm for sure gonna be taken in the top 5, no matter what the situation is, at least
yeah.
top 4. So it's business decisions that he's making, and character wise, I think I like Roma Dunze better. I don't like Marvin Harrison's character over Roma Dunze. When people
Mm,
say is he going to be the next Larry Fitzgerald? No, he's not. I'm going to say that right now. And I'm not talking about like a production standpoint or if he's ever going to overtake him. I'm talking about the type of person that Larry Fitzgerald is. Nobody can be as good as Larry Fitzgerald, especially for this franchise. We're lucky to have somebody like him be in this franchise, retire for us, be the character that he is. Nobody's going to stand up to him. So if people are thinking, oh, is he going to be the next Larry Fitzgerald for us? No, he's not. And he's the type of person that he's going to get the bag. Even if we draft him and he has a great career, we better pull the Brinks trucks out to
mm.
keep him or he's going to leave.
Yeah, and that's one of the things, at least with the Cardinals and the prices, and we've seen them not be as active at the end of free agency. This is a team that is going to build through the draft, that knows and understands what they're doing as far as with their rebuild for the most part. I do agree with the comment here that Dana said Fitz wasn't Fitz rookie year. It said Emmett had to knock some sense into him. I also think back to the interview, of course, that happened with the likes of I think it was the previous offensive coordinator, Todd Haley, who said, "Hey, Fitz, you're a one-trick pony." Now, that one trick was basically Larry Fitzgerald running down the field and jumping up and just beating 4 or 5 people, even if they were all covering him, he would still find a way to come
That
down
was a
with
really
the
good
ball.
trick.
That was why he was Larry Legend. Yeah, but it does show at least that one of the differences is he had the ability and he had to kind of develop himself. I think that none of these receivers are going to come into the league, like you said, and be that Larry Fitzgerald 2008 Super Bowl run. But at the same time, you're also going to be looking at a little bit of a different profile. Like Fitzgerald had that athleticism, speed, and jumping ability at like 225 pounds. Like he could outweigh anybody. Harrison Jr. is a little bit lighter for the most part. I think it's going to be very interesting to see. I think that the biggest thing for the most part, if you look at a lot of that stuff, is that Marvin Harrison Jr. and everything that we've seen, a lot of what he's gone through, and this is what I think was reported. He even talked to teams and said, "Hey, to the teams in the top 9, he said," and this is reported by Albert Breer, "Do you want me to work out? Because if you do, I'll work out." And to me, that I think shows some of the character, because it means that if you're a guy who's like, "Hey, I'm just not going to work out for you guys," okay, well, that's one thing that can get you called a diva. But if you say, "Hey, I don't want to work out, I want to be prepping so I can be with your team for like the first part of the season and get ready for the actual NFL season," which, as we've seen with a lot of players, they do sometimes hit that rookie wall because they play 12 to 13 games in college. Even those national champions, they'll only play 15 games in college, and that's against college athletes. It's not against NFL defensive backs. Like you're going up against guys who are not going to be much more than second or third string guys in the league, sometimes at best in colleges, because it's a huge disparity. I think that does show a lot to me about his character in at least a positive way, because a lot of the teams just said to him, "We don't need to see you. You're good. You don't have to work out." There weren't any doubts that they had about his production or trying to hide something. I think that does say a little bit about his character, and it's going to be really interesting to see because we've already seen a little bit from maybe indications isn't the best word, but maybe you can kind of say like reading some of the tea leaves. One of the things I think we can read the tea leaves on, and this is something I think may come out in the next couple days. There's some people wondering what Malik Neighbors is going to measure in at. Right now, he's listed at 6'3" and about 193 pounds or so. There's some talk that, this is not breaking news, at least for the most part, but if he comes in less than 6 foot, does that change the way you'd feel about him as a Cardinals fan? I don't know if it truly does for me, but a lot of Cardinals fans, and I think you and I can agree, Marcos, you'd probably say Kyler with a guy that has length. Hopkins was only 6'1", but being able to have the long arms and huge hands he did to kind of snag some of those balls that you were a little in front of him, that seems to fit Odunze and Harrison Jr. a bit better, I think, overall. It would not shock me if the Cardinals had Harrison Jr. number 1 and Odunze number 2 as far as receivers go on their board. And that seems to line up with some of the reports. So this is from Tony Pauline, who last year, just for some context, he gave a report about the Arizona Cardinals that talked about who was going to be the guy who was going to be traded up for in the NFL draft. And he talked about, hey, you can see that a team is going to be, let me get this shared here for those you watching. He said, hey, teams are looking to trade up to 3 with the Cardinals for Paris Johnson Jr. And this was kind of the news out of the combine. I always have talked about, there's always people talk about what's smoke, what's not real. Usually the stuff that you hear at the NFL combine, it's not the people are lying. This is the event where people go to it, and just like in 2019, we went into the said, hey, Josh is our guy. Cliff just said this. And we came out of the combine. There was guys like Louis Riddick, Ada Schefter, like, oh yeah, no, like the Cardinals are drafting Kyler Murray number 1 overall. It was just, that was the thing. And that was when the rumors took on a whole new light because people knew that the combine was where stuff would happen. When you look at last year, at least Tony Pauline, the Cardinals, they want to trade down. Last year, he talked about and said, hey, I was told by people the Cardinals could stay at 3 and take Paris Johnson. I was looking at this going, yeah, I mean, from what we knew and heard, they liked him. I didn't think they liked him as much as Will Anderson, but we knew they were looking to trade back. There was obviously teams that were looking to move up now, though, in hindsight, because we saw CJ Stroud went with the number 2 overall pick. I think if he fell to number 3 and Will Anderson went at 2, there's probably the Cardinals are getting their phone off the hook. They still made a trade back with the Houston Texans for that 27th now pick. But we also saw that Tony wasn't off with the info. They actually did trade back up for Paris Johnson. I think back to the 2023 OTAs that they had, at least from their offseason. Paris Johnson was a guy that they drafted, I think in part because we looked at through OTAs, and DJ Humphries, he actually was not practicing with the team during OTs. He still was not healthy enough from his injury last year. I think that was kind of the indication when we saw that went, oh, they may be needing to move on from this year, or there could be a risk that you could see with Humphries. And we ultimately saw that kind of, unfortunately, come to fruition with the Cardinals. It hurts you to cut your longest tenured player, but at the same time, just sometimes your body breaks down on you. I think that Pauline was correct in his reporting, saying that the Cardinals were going to probably really like a Paris Johnson enough that maybe they would have even considered taking him at 3 because of that need on the offensive line. I think the year before, at least with each of those things, we actually had on this previous show, the Redbird Reboot podcast, previously the Revenge of the Birds podcast. You can still find our stories there, by the way. They were honed in. That was the exact terms he used on Zaven Collins with that 16th pick in 2021. That was what Tony Pauline himself, when he came onto the show, said. He's a guy that knows the cards. He's dialed in. Well, the rumors that he has this year talked a lot about the quarterback prospects. And so these are the quarterback prospects who are more going to be the kind of guys who are like with the JJ McCarthy's, and where some of those prospects will fall. Actually, I think I've got the old story here. Let me make sure I get this pulled up. Pauline said this year, what he talked about was the biggest question for teams is not who's going 1, 2, or 3. It's going to be what team is going to be trading up with pick number 4. And he also talked about the spot. He says a lot of people are saying around the league they're expecting that the team that's looking to trade up is going to be the Vikings. But there's another team that may be looking to trade down as well. And he had it as the Los Angeles Chargers, who he had. So what I found interesting was, and I'll pull up this exact quote so we can have it, Marcos, the Chargers are picking after the Cardinals. If you're wanting to lock in a top 4 quarterback, like you're gonna have to go and be able to talk about like getting up to pick number 4. It makes sense. The fact that the Cardinals were not mentioned made me wonder if they do think that there is an opportunity for not for the Cardinals, but for a team has to trade up to pick 5 because pick 4 may be off the table. What do you think about that?
Well, that just kind of lessens our little because of the fact that we're kind of giving it out there that like who we want to draft at the number 4 position if he's there. So if there's another team that's looking to trade back, like the Chargers, that just kind of ruins like trade talks because then they have somebody else that they can work with. Because if they know for a fact that the Cardinals aren't taking a quarterback and you want to trade because you want to draft a quarterback, then thus like, just for the mere fact that the Cardinals are committed to Kyler Murray, that makes it a no-go at that situation. Now it's just about people wanting to trade to try to get Marvin Harrison Jr. because they know that if that pick is at number 4, most likely the Cardinals are going to take him. So now if you
Right.
see a situation where you have a trade back scenario and that Los Angeles Chargers that strategy is exactly what they're going to do and most likely what they're going to do. Now I don't even know if I even get excited for
Right.
trading back from number 4 unless the Cardinals trade back to number 5 somehow and do some weird thing with the Chargers where they take their pick, trade them back or whatnot. So it's a trade. That's another 2022 like draft situation, 2023 draft situation where you're trading back and you're trading back in. So I mean that kind of does muddy the waters for me. I had no idea that was the situation. Now that you told me, I mean
Yeah.
knowledge is power. Power is knowledge and whatnot. So now now we know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, here's the exact quote, at least that you can see here. It says, for the most part, the feedback on JJ McCarthy is positive. I think also his stock is being boosted by the fact that if teams are going quarterback 1, 2, 3, and we've seen all the indications so far that they probably are going quarterback 1, 2, 3, that means it'd be Marv at 4, but you'd have to guarantee that spot. The thing that's interesting, he said, hey, belief in Ann Arbor, all the people I talked to going to the pro day, seeing Jim Harbaugh there, was that the Chargers could trade out of the 5th spot if a team wants to jump in front of the Giants, who Daniel Jones is coming off injury. We don't know if he's going to be ready for week 1. If he does make it past the Giants, the Falcons at 8 or the Jets at 10 could be trade destinations. What's funny is it's like, all right, well, who did he speak to in Ann Arbor about this? Who would you know from the Chargers who has said that? Well, he just said among the attendees was Jim Harbaugh, who's now the coach of the Los Angeles Chargers. I think that we can kind of put 2 and 2 together. Not to say that he told them this directly, but that the people on the staff that were there, they didn't say they're going to probably move up to number 4. The belief overall was that the Chargers were looking to trade down. Now, let me tell you, if I'm Jim Harbaugh and I'm there at that pro day and I want to recoup some first round picks, get an offensive lineman in there to run the ball with Greg Roman, I'd be going there like, hey guys, you see that guy? Yeah, that's my quarterback there. By the way, you want him? We're open for business. Come on down. That I think also is important because if you'd said, hey, the Cardinals or Chargers are open, I think that most people around the league think that the Cardinals are going to stick and pick. And I think that that may be, at least from what I would say, I think that it would be the right move there for the Arizona Cardinals. Right now, we'll see. Things can obviously change. Marcos, let's get out of here with a couple of bold predictions here if you have for that one. So you have a bold prediction you want to make either with the draft or the cards as we wrap up today.
Well, I'll go ahead and go with the draft. So now that you gave me that knowledge, I think what's going to happen in a situation is we're going to do a scenario where somebody might want to trade up, and we know Monty Austin Fort has a somewhat of a tendency to want to get more picks and whatnot
It's
because
true.
I think he just wants to build all around. So that's not what I would do. So what I think what Monty Austin Fort will do is he'll entertain these talks. He will trade out. That situation's now going to be a situation where that one team is either going to take a quarterback or it's
Mm,
going to take Marvin. So after
could be.
trading back, depending on where he's at the draft, he might stick with a team if they trade back from
Ooh.
like early tens between the 10 and 15. He might stick right there because he knows, okay, let's not lose more picks this year. Let's just stick and pick to what we got. And if there's a good offensive tackle that he sees on the board, he's gonna probably take that. If a Dunze is on the board, which I don't think he will be, he
Yeah.
will take him, but he's probably not gonna be at the board. So I think it's gonna be a situation where 2 positions are gonna be really like on his radar. It's either gonna be offensive tackle at that pick or it's going to be defensive tackle at that pick. And then the second first round pick is going to be corner. That's what I believe.
Nice. If I'm going to make a bold prediction, at least with everything, I'll probably go in similar spot with the draft. At least I will say that there will be a team that we don't expect to take a quarterback that will take one either by trading back from their pick or by trading up into the back of the first round for that. And I'm going to predict that that quarterback at least would be, I'm going to say it's going to be Bo Nix, not Spencer Rattler. It would be Bo Nix that a team would take. I could see that being the Broncos with trading back for him, but I could also see another team trading up from the end of the first round, at least to try to be able to get him. Maybe one that is a bit surprising. There are some teams that are picking in the NFL draft this year that, like a good example would be the Atlanta Falcons, Kirk Cousins on like a 1 or 2 year deal. If Bo Nix starts and falls into the late first round and the Falcons are going, hey, we got Kirk for 2 years, but we can sit Bo Nix behind him. He can take over. Let's jump up to be able to get our quarterback behind him specifically just to be able to get that extra year. Maybe his age is a bit much, but I do think that there could be another quarterback even within him, or Michael Penix to the Seahawks is another very popular one. They do have the Washington offensive coordinator went to Alabama and said, nope, I'm going to Seattle now. So, but that would be mine. And then the last but not least, thank you guys so much for tuning in. This is one of the great shows we've been able to have with all of you guys here. If you don't want to, make sure you're doing us a favor, we've got our podcast, the Redbird Reboot. It's going to be available, and I've gotten back to uploading the audio after each episode is done. You can listen to that on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, as well as at revengeofthebirds.com, where you can find me and my writings. I'm Blake Murphy 7. Marcos, you can shout out to where the listeners and viewers can find you.
You can always find me on X at Pancake Soul. You can find me here, of course, if you guys want to get more insight about like us breaking down what we break down. Obviously, our video episodes are preferable in that situation. If you just want audio, like Blake Murphy just mentioned, he uploads it right after we're done, and those are great listens as well. Obviously, I don't think the video portion gets put in there because you need to see the video visually, but I would say that right now, as it ranks, we're the only podcast that's in that scenario. So if you want to see some film study, come right in.
Absolutely. Thanks again for tuning in, everyone. This has been the Redbird Reboot podcast. We're over now, and that means it's time to log off. Take care and have a good Saturday, everyone.
Take care.